Why did you get fired? Story 1. I talked my way into a job at a software company when they put a hiring notice in a local paper. I had no idea what the software did. I still don't. They hired me as a trainer, and no one ever explained what the product was. I did a few weeks where I was trained on the software, but literally none of it ever made sense to me. It was like they were speaking gibberish. One day I showed up. A lady I had never seen before gave me a check and walked me out to the parking lot. No one even ever said, "You're fired," or anything. It's one of the strangest things that ever happened to me. Ah, I see they tried to teach you SAP. SAP is the most unintuitive, user-unfriendly BS I've ever used. Just visited the website and I left without getting any idea of what they do. What my company uses it for is inventory management, creating and processing purchase orders for different vendors, various project management tasks, stuff like that. But imagine that it was built by a group of undergraduate computer science students, and they were specifically told not to worry about making it look modern or user-friendly. So, yes, it works, but you're going to need someone who already knows it to show you how to do things. And if you're trying to figure out something on your own, you might end up breaking something. I'm sure other companies have versions that are easier to use, but I work for a Fortune 500 company, so I'm surprised at how much ours sucks. That reminds me of a time that I got escorted out early from a group interview. The company was a little suspicious altogether. The interviewer was even more sus because he was just wearing all black, polo and jeans, and was absolutely decked out in gold jewelry. Looked like he stepped out of a mob movie or something. Sounds like you were interviewing for a pyramid scheme and asking questions they didn't like. I walked out of one of those before actually meeting anyone once. I knew what it was and didn't want to go to it. My parents, however, aren't the sharpest sometimes, and they really believed the thing that came in the mail saying a 17-year-old could get a sales job making over $100K a year. The interview was literally in an abandoned former hotel, with printer paper signs directing you what room to go to. I walked in, and there were a bunch of kids waiting who all looked younger than me, like 13, all wearing their middle school choir best of a way too large white button-up and baggy khakis. I turned around and walked out. Spent an hour at the local music store and told my parents the interview went badly. In my experience, places doing a group interview are a major red flag. One place I applied for some kind of data analysis / software-related advertisement. I showed up, and there's 30 other freshly graduated idiots like myself in suits. They pull 3 of us back at a time to do a group interview, and the owner of the company reveals that the job is door-to-door sales and that in order to succeed, we must be willing to work ourselves to the bone. No excuses to not show up, even if your family members are in the hospital. I told him straight up I actually gave a care about my family, and he kicked me out of the interview right then and there. The other 2 guys actually looked legitimately kind of scared. I walked out with a smile on my face, feeling bad for whichever guys ended up accepting a job there. Freshly graduated idiots, thanks for the cackle. I was also one of those idiots who got tricked into going in for an interview where the office lobby looked like an ER waiting room, absolutely chock full of suckers like me. During the group interview, they didn't ever actually even say it was door-to-door sales. It was stated in the pamphlet they'd handed out to us and on the PowerPoint, almost like it wasn't said out loud at any point that it was door-to-door. Then we'd never actually catch on that it was door-to-door sales, like the Neanderthals they took us to be. I think I was only in one job interview ever that was a group thing, and it was depressing. Them just talking to you, just this one person talking to everyone there, and it was like a phone sales interview, and all it was just telling you everything you couldn't do And for the pay that they were offering, I think even at any pay they were offering, it wasn't worth it for that list alone. Story 2. I was denied a raise by HR after consistently working 60 to 70-hour weeks, and my VP, who had supported and requested the raise for me, told me to stop putting in the extra time, work my 40, and spend the extra time applying to new jobs. Within a month, a meeting was called to mutually part ways because my work wasn't getting done. I was gratified to learn that they had to hire 2 people to do my job after I left. Edit. Sucks to see how much this resonates with people who have been in similar situations. I left this job back in 2015, thankfully. The VP is no longer there either, and good for him. I hear this story often in IT career questions. It's weird, but I guess in IT there aren't always logistical blocks like some other careers. Payroll might be done for our current period, but enhancements to the payroll software can continue ad nauseum. What's sad is that most of these stories skip the part where the VP needs to be pushing for you to justify this level of effort. The second he recognizes he didn't have the power to get you what he deserved, he said, don't give it to him for free, and get yourself what you can anywhere. That's a rare level of grace now. I encountered a similar situation, and my bum boss just said, keep trying your best, maybe they'll notice. I said I'd rather spend that energy looking for work elsewhere. But that felt good knowing they had to pay 2 people for what you did all by yourself. Glad you got out of there, though. I had a friend who was working like that, and I was convinced to find a new job. He did, and the new company was going to pay him 4 times what he was getting paid. He tells his boss, and they came back with a counteroffer that matched. He told me he was probably going to stay. I said, forget that. They knew your worth and intentionally underpaid you for years. Anyway, he treated me to dinner for several months after he took the new job. I said, forget that they knew your worth and intentionally underpaid you for years. There's also the risk of retribution. If you take a counteroffer, they now still know you're looking elsewhere and might make your life miserable if you choose to stay. Maybe this is just the millennial in me, but if I was working 70 hours a week, denied a raise, and had my position filled by 2 people, I wouldn't have felt good or gratified. I'd have been ticked. Wasted my time, wasted my life, wasted my potential, refused to pay me even half of what they're now paying. That company and everyone involved in the process of denying that raise should be themselves fired for being jerkwads. The only thing this story conjures in my mind is that scene from Futurama where they show all the Fox executives making a joke about canceling and bring the show back. Oh man, before I go on to that, very true. If you get another offer, no, don't go back and tell the other people. I mean, this sounds like it was a bad environment anyway. I don't know what the reason this person had for staying, but if they found a better job, just take it. Don't tell them anything. There is, that one person said, there's always a possibility for retribution. Or they may try to counteroffer you, but they don't offer anything in writing, so they can always renege on their deal. They'll try to find some way to keep you at the pay they have been paying you. Story 3. I went to the emergency room instead of work. Came back with an ER note, and they said, we won't be needing that. Can you come with us? I was 18, and it was my first full-time job. I had pneumonia and a doctor's note. Came back to work a week later, wheezing and puffing an inhaler. Got fired the next week. Joke's on them. I still got unemployment benefits when they tried to fight it. Doctor's notes are good things. Some of the companies literally fight every claim, whether they're valid or not. It's disgusting, and there should be penalties for such companies. I went to a funeral and took the 3 paid days off and called off a 4th because it was my grandmother and we were very close. They called it job abandonment. Earlier this year, I was hospitalized for a full work week for a miscarriage that had a lot of complications. My direct boss, a woman, was completely empathetic, and even though I'm a one-person team, she encouraged me to take off all the time that I wanted/needed. So I did, and took an extra week off after being released from the hospital to just process some things and physically recover. I needed blood transfusions and multiple surgeries beyond just a D&C. Also, couldn't walk around much and had almost no energy for anything except sleep. Anyway, about a month later, revenue reports came in for the previous month, and there was a massive drop in revenue for my team, correlating directly with the period I was hospitalized and in recovery. While I was out, no one at work covered for me, so that work just didn't get done, and it led to a big $0 for most of the month. My boss's boss, a man, then sent an angry, accusatory email to me with my direct boss CC'd. They demanded to know why my team had done so poorly for the previous month and what I was going to do to step it up and make sure it never happened again, because whatever mistake I had made was completely unacceptable. Corporate America at its absolute finest. Please tell me you walked out of that office and went straight to the labor board. I was fired over a miscarriage because while I was miscarrying, I got a D&C, and the paperwork said it was an elective procedure. I had been miscarrying for over a week and needed one, but it's considered an elective procedure, so I was fired. I don't know about that part, but I was actually in a job once. I had fallen off my bike and fractured my wrist. You might see the scar there. I had to have surgery, but I had a doctor's note saying I could still operate a computer with one hand for what I was doing, and they still used that to justify cutting my pay in half, and it was already bad as it is. And all the while, they were saying, well, I talked to my lawyers. They thought they were doing me a favor. They were trying to sell it that way. It was awful. Story 4. I got fired once for putting in my 2-week notice. The only other time I've gotten fired was working for a trade company during the first week. I was a supervisor, and there was a second supervisor on site. I got a call that my wife had been rushed to the hospital, which was literally less than a mile away. I asked the other supervisor if I could go to attend to her, and he said, sure, no problem, I've got things here, go. I returned to the job site later to find the boss there, and he let me go on the spot for leaving the team without a supervisor. He knew what had happened and still fired me. That one kind of ticked me off. I had this happen once too, though they gave me 2 weeks severance when they did it. Turns out they weren't angry that I was leaving. They just had prior bad experiences with short-timer syndrome and didn't want the hassle, so they paid me as if I'd done the 2 weeks and sent me home immediately. Worked out fine for me. I got a 2-week paid vacation, since I wasn't starting the new job for 2 weeks anyway, between jobs. Many employees terminate immediately when someone gives notice. They figure you don't want to be there anymore. What damage could you do on your way out? That's a normal thing in some places. They call it garden leave. Especially common if you're living in an industry where your up-to-date knowledge is valuable to competitors, such as a salesperson who knows which customers are currently in the market. Garden leave in that case can sometimes be 6 months or more to ensure everything you know is obsolete. Happened to my wife. She was due her first commission check, but they fired on the spot when she gave notice. Literally about $100 too. The company I used to work for did that routinely. It was meant to be punitive, since it kept people from cashing out their vacation time. So employees started burning through all their vacation and giving notice immediately on their return. The managers looked surprised the first time someone did it, but didn't change their MO. Instead, they got really paranoid every time someone went away for more than a few days. Story 5. My manager kept losing my class schedule. I worked at a Subway. I had class 2 days a week. Several times he put me on those days anyway. I gave him multiple copies every time. Owner took me off the schedule for calling out too much. When I showed the owner proof, he said it was too late and they already hired someone else. This was 12 years ago. I'm still mad. I always hated the taken off the schedule bull. Just fire me officially instead of taking the coward's route. This happened to me as well when I didn't tell the general manager about a floor manager switching a product display TV to football one day. To be clear, she asked me, "Why did you not tell me?" So she already knew it happened and was mad that I didn't say anything. So I got taken off the schedule because the other manager did something against policy and I did not narc. Oh my deity, it's such a cowardly move. My sister was running around the country for a retail chain, replacing the freshly fired manager and retraining/unmessing the store before moving on to the next one. This one store she goes to start unmessing, and they have like 3 employees that are working. Overtime is off the charts. People are fired and everything is failing. When she went to pull the records, it turned out they had over 20 staff that had just not been given hours in months instead of being fired. She had to call up these people and either get them to quit or come back before being able to hire/train. Absolute feces show. Just fire people, deity damn. Same over here. I worked at a maternity store. I got super sick and was throwing my guts up for 4 days in the hospital. Later found out it was COVID. I had all the paperwork needed for it to not affect my work, and my manager just ignored me. Even hid in the back and locked the door when I showed up to figure out what was going on. Told her I was going to contact HR since I tried everything and nothing was being done, and that's when she finally responded saying she took me off the schedule because I was sick too much. This was the only time I ever called out. Needless to say, the place closed because they couldn't even keep employees due to her. Hey, find a way to go to the labor board, get unemployment. You were there for like a few minutes, and if they're still dragging you along, and if there is any kind of proof that you were fired, that if someone said that, get the unemployment. Just work that. You need to have your time. You need to be able to get paid while you're looking for other work. It's probably a long shot, but pursue it. Might as well.
Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 6. A business I went to long ago was hiring, and I got the job. Right after I signed all the paperwork, the department manager comes in and asks who I am. I tell him I was just hired as a temp. Manager says he never authorized any hiring and fired both me and my boss on the spot. I did not work for this company at all, and they fired me. I had a similar experience. I was interviewing for a sales position, and I made it all the way up the ladder through 3 different managers to the advertising director. Had a great interview. He told me I would be the future of this industry, shook my hand, led me to the HR manager's office, clapped me on the back, and said to her, "We're hiring him. Start the paperwork and I'll see you Monday." She was pregnant, tired, and annoyed. She looked at me with disgust and said, "We eliminated that position yesterday. We're not hiring anyone." I asked if the director or managers knew that. She said they should. What followed was an embarrassing 2 weeks of promises that they would make a spot for me and weak apologies from the hiring managers. Oof. Hired and fired within seconds. They did you a favor. Working for a company that's broken and dysfunctional would be a nightmare. It was McClatchy Newspapers in Boise. I think their motto turned into, "Fail up until you fail out." You dodged a bullet. I don't know many people who have worked in newspaper advertising and haven't come out of it with some amount of PTSD. I had literal flashbacks for years. You have to really love it to stay without burning out completely, or have to really not give any cares whatsoever. Papers are also really on edge financially, so they are prone to botching people over hard, too. Well, I'm sorry, there's just no way that we could keep you on. I don't even really work here. That's what makes this so difficult. Aw, dude. Fired before even having the job. Story 7. This isn't why I got fired, but this is why I didn't get a job. I was 16 and looking for work at a Dairy Queen as my first job. My mom drove me to the interview and I was super nervous. She looked me in the eye and said, "Just be honest and be yourself, and you'll do fine." I walked into that interview, and when he asked me, "How long do you think you'll work here?" I responded, "Until something better comes along." OMG. My parents had to coach me on how to get a job when I started hunting. They were wondering why none of the jobs I had applied to had called me back, so they started asking questions about the application process. Turns out, you shouldn't be honest on those personality assessments. At least, not to the extent I was. They basically told me to answer as if I was another person. We were surprised when our son wasn't getting any calls for interviews when he went out looking for his first teen job, as his resume was decent for his age with volunteer work and little odd jobs. And I had sat with him as he applied, so I knew his applications were well done. Then I phoned his cell one day and caught his voicemail. He had never changed it from the day he said it as an obnoxious little gamer kid, so it was basically him screaming into the phone and then saying in a robot voice to not leave a message with a bunch of other stupidity. Brilliant. Yeah, always keep it professional. That includes stupid email usernames. Double sigh. Story 8. My parole officer wanted to make sure I actually had a job, so he went to my employer listed on my file to surprise visit me on the job. I did home wiring, so I worked at different job sites and rarely in the office. He called me to say he was going to charge me with a violation for lying to him about my whereabouts. This could have landed me back in prison for my remaining 10.5-year sentence. The owner of the company had to speak with him and vouch for me. My parole officer didn't charge me, but the owner sure did fire me that day. Finding a job with a felony isn't an easy thing, and it wasn't long before my parole officer threatened to charge me with a violation if I didn't find a job soon. What an absolute clown process. I'm sorry you went through that. Seems illegal for the owner to fire you just because they had to explain you're in a site. I imagine they hired you knowing you had a felony, since that's a big question on every job app. I read it like the boss fired him because he didn't disclose he was a felon, not that he was on the site. The owner was aware. He explained that he was apprehensive about hiring me in the first place, but to have these situations brought to his business was a liability he no longer wanted to bear. As a reformed felon, I get it. Having some badge with a bad attitude show up like that isn't a good look. I guarantee the parole officer knew as much, too. Hope you're off paper and doing all right now. Hell, that's rough, mate. Sorry to hear. Story 9. I refused to come in 15 to 20 minutes early unpaid for my shift. I was always 5 to 10 minutes early, but they decided they wanted me there earlier. I carried on as normal, and I'm not coming in if I'm not being paid. Turned up for a 12 p.m. shift at 11:49. No one would look at me when I arrived, then was thrown into a meeting and fired for being late. Was out the door before it even hit 12. It was the only time I've ever been fired. You went out the door and straight to the Department of Labor, right? Nope. UK. Worked for them for 3 years, then left for another job. Another job didn't work out, and an old job reached out to me. They wanted me back, and I needed a job, but it also meant that they could fire me for whatever reason they wanted as I was in the probation period. They had me work the Christmas rush, then used that excuse to fire me right at the end. They could have just not given a reason and dismissed me at the end of 3 months as no longer required, but they wanted to be petty, likely because I had a major disagreement with a manager. Minor disagreement was, I made a judgment call and ordered the newbies to get the stock out on the shop floor during a rush rather than being bothered about how straight the labels were. Manager went bananas over it. I thought selling the stock was more important. I got so much grief over them damn labels. Story 10. For doing my job too quickly and sitting down the rest of the time. Gas station cashier, 3rd shift. Me. Why should I stand when I'm the only person in the store? Manager. It's more professional to stand than sit. Me. Then why do you sit in your office? I never understood that. Not once have I walked into an establishment, seen an employee sitting, and gone, wow, he's unprofessional. I literally don't give a care as long as you do your job. Especially gas stations. If anything, they're the kind of jobs I would expect to see someone sitting. Same for cashiers at grocery stores and other department stores. Nobody thinks, ew, look at that cashier sitting down while she helps me. This store sucks. If they do, they're pieces of poop, and no normal company should cater to their sadistic whims. In fact, I prefer places where the workers are treated humanely, like being allowed to sit and be comfortable for the duration of their shifts. Story 11. His wife thought he was having an affair with the office manager. He asked me if I thought it was possible that he was having an affair with the office manager. I said, it's possible, but I don't think you are. I could see why your wife might think so, too. I was 21 and naive as hell. Never should have said anything. He was 100% having an affair with the office manager. She knew too much. Story 12. For reporting elder abuse. That's retaliation. Illegal, at least in the U.S. Unfortunately, it's also extremely difficult to prove and expensive to fight. Story 13. I built a snow scorpion sculpture. I used ketchup for the red glowing eyes and everything on a particularly miserable day at a ski resort. The guests enjoyed my sculpture very much, but the management weren't so happy. Sounds like awful management. Sad. I'm glad to hear you made the guests happy, though.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.